Morning, guys. So we're picking up where we left off last week. Alex was leading us through this beginnings of a very epic event with King Saul. And last week was, if you guys can think back with me, when we started our series, we had like two arcs. One was an arc for Saul, and one was an arc for David. And so it was like this, they started up, and then there's like this turning point, this moment where it seemed that everything afterwards was just bad. And so when we think about the life of King Saul, the events that happened last week was what I think is a fair assessment that everything afterwards kind of started going down for him. And so if you remember it, Alex was leading us through this story where all Saul had to do was wait. He had to wait for Samuel to show up. He had to wait for this prophet of God to show up. And once he did that, then they would be delivered. And Saul basically, in his view, waited as long as he could. There was the army of the Philistines were all around them, and there's not a whole lot that he felt like he could do. And so he took matters into his own hand, and instead of waiting, he made a sacrifice which he shouldn't have done. And as a result, the lineage of the crown would end with Saul. So how monarchs work generally is that when the kids were born, usually if it was a son, they would be crowned the king after their father died. And so what Samuel was doing was he was saying that this monarchy that started in Israel, it will not go any further than you, Saul. And it will be taken away and it will be given to somebody else. And so that's kind of a bit of a recap of the story from last week. And so if you kind of can remember a bit of the details, we learned that there was this army of Philistines that were all around them and divided up in different battalions. And in chapter 13, it gives us a bit of a number. It says that there were 30,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen, and then it gives this detail saying that there was foot soldiers as many as the sand on the sea. It's like no matter where you looked, all you could see was an army. And so it wasn't looking very great. And so when we get to chapter 14, there's this reduced number of the Israelite people out of sheer terror that they're like, you know what, we're actually not going to survive this. And so at the end of chapter 13, we learn that out of all the army that showed up, only 600 remained. And of that 600, there was only 2 people in that army that owned swords. The rest was they were using these farm implements to attack. And so we should be getting in this image in our head that, like, you know, it's not looking good, right? Chapter 14 is not promising to be a very great conclusion for our hero. And then we have to ask, well, who is our hero? As chapter 14 opens, there is this Philistine garrison on an opposite end of a valley of Saul and his army. So here's a bit of an illustration for you guys that can kind of give you a bit of a helpful eye. So what you're seeing is on the left there was Saul and his army that were hiding in caves. And on the right there was this huge, massive garrison or army of the Philistines, all who owned swords and well, I guess I made spears in that one, so I'm sure there was some spears in there too. And as Alex was talking about last week, we see, and as we've kind of mentioned and alluded to, we're seeing a shift in the character of Saul. From now on, when we hear about Saul, it's not going to be generally in a positive light. And I think that is something for us just to keep in mind. When we continue in our story, I think it's also helpful for us just to keep in mind that King Saul has just been told that his lineage will no longer continue with kings. So I'm guessing that what's going on in his head right now is probably a lot of hurt and probably a lot of sadness and fear that he's facing. Where is God in this? What should I do? And at the beginning of chapter 14, we get introduced to a new character, and his name is Jonathan. And Jonathan is a very, very interesting character in the life of Saul and of David. In a few weeks, we're going to talk a little bit more about Jonathan and Saul, and David's relationship. But what we're getting in the beginning here is, and I would say throughout this entire story, is an actual contrast of what's going on. So we have the character of Saul, who's the king for now, making decisions that are generally just not great. And then we have Jonathan, his son, who is actually in stark contrast, the exact opposite of his father. And so, as we were talking about the past few weeks, we learned about Eli, okay, and he was a priest. We learned about Samuel, who was a priest and a prophet, and a judge. And how are they doing as fathers? Are they great fathers? They are not great fathers. And we see that with their kids, their sons who basically start rebelling really hard, and their fathers are seen not doing anything about it. And so, you can see also a bit of a contrast going on. So you got Eli and Samuel, and then who are seen as fairly strong, godly men, and their sons who are seen as not. And then we get to the character of Saul. And is he a godly man? Well, he starts strong, but for the rest of the story, he doesn't do a great job. But then you see his son. And does his son walk in his father's footsteps? Well, he actually doesn't. And so there's this other contrast that's going on. Except what's interesting about Jonathan is that the contrast that we are seeing is that Jonathan, although he's not following in his father's footsteps, as a result, it's actually causing him to be more godly. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at these two characters, Saul and Jonathan, and we're just going to see how these contrasts get played out, all right? So, starting in verse 2, it says that Saul was staying in the outskirts of Gibeah in the pomegranate cave at Migron. The people who were with him were about 600 men, including Ahijah, the son of Athabab, Ichabod's brother, son of Phinehas, son of Eli, the priest of the Lord in Shiloh, wearing an ephod. All right, Ahijah, okay? Good guy, bad guy? What do you guys think? Is Ahijah a good guy or a bad guy? Good guy. Anybody else? We don't know. The Bible actually doesn't talk about what kind of person Ahijah is. He could have been a good guy. But what we do know about Ahijah is his lineage. And does he come from a great lineage? He does not come from a great lineage. So whatever we know about Ahijah, we know that his forefathers were not doing a great job. And what I think the author is doing is he is wanting us to consider that when we think about his character. And he's actually, I think what the author is doing is he's actually wanting us to consider another story where we learn about another character, actually one of his forefathers, Phinehas, who does a very similar thing. He takes the ark into a battle, hoping that it will change things. And how does that story go? They do great, right? They do not do great. They get absolutely slaughtered. And so what we're trying to think here is that whatever's happening, there is this repetition that's going on with King Saul, who is doing the exact same thing as the Israelites were doing before him. He was taking God into battle in this confined way, and he was hoping that this will change the fate, change the conclusion of this battle. And so we're going to come back to this closer to the end of our time, but I just want you to have that in your mind this morning. So while Saul and Ahijah and the ark and his army are all hiding in caves, trying to figure out what in the world they're supposed to do, unbeknownst to Saul, his son, Jonathan, gets up and goes off with his armor bearer, and they decide to fight the Philistines themselves. So not 600 men, but 2 men into this battle that is hopelessly outnumbered, impossible to win. Sometimes in the Bible we get, I guess you would call them these unsung heroes. There are these people in the Bible that they don't really get a whole lot of airtime, but their actions reveal this deep integrity and this mindset of a unwavering, unashamed loyalty that they will just pursue come what may. And I think what we're seeing with this armor bearer is that he is one of those unsung heroes. In fact, what's interesting is we don't even know his name. The author doesn't even tell us that his name is of that importance. All that matters is the actions that he does. And we see this unwavering loyalty in verse 7 when when Jonathan instructs him to come into battle, and his response is to do all that is in your heart. Do as you wish. Behold, I am with you, heart and soul. What is he saying? He's like, wherever you go, whatever you do, whatever you ask of me, I will do it. And I will be with you. And honestly, it is not a great pep talk that Jonathan gives him. He does not tell him, we will definitely win, so don't worry. In fact, he tells him something a little less clear. He says, come on, let's go to the garrison of the uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us, for nothing can hinder the Lord from saving by many or by few. It almost sounds like he's saying, come on, let's go into this battle. Who knows? Maybe the Lord will deliver us. If he wants us to succeed, he will. But it is the Lord's will to decide this, not the amount of people that are behind us. This trust, this unwavering loyalty that Jonathan holds, that his armor bearer holds to Jonathan, and that Jonathan and his armor bearer hold to the Lord, it continues throughout the story. When we go into verse 8, it says that Jonathan said to his armor bearer, "Behold, we will cross over to the men, and we will show ourselves to them. If they say to us, 'Wait until we come to you,' then we will stand still in our place, and we will not go up to them. But if they say, 'Come up to us,' then we will go up, for the Lord has given them into our hand, and this shall be a sign for us." I am going to just give you that picture again. Okay? So our two options are, we're going to go down, we're going to go to the base of this cliff, and one of two things is going to happen. One, the Philistines will say, "Hang on, we'll climb down this cliff, and then we'll attack you. We have the high ground, the obvious military advantage, so we'll climb down, and we will attack you too." That's one thing that could happen. The second thing that could happen, they will say to us, "Climb on up." What do you think is the smarter thing to do? The first one or the second one? The second one. Why on earth would a whole army climb down a hill and get totally destroyed by two people? Which also is highly unlikely that that would happen. The most illogical thing for them to do would be to climb down that cliff. As Jonathan and his armor bearer approach, the Philistines spot them, and they say, "Look, Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they have hidden themselves." And then they say, "Come up, because we want to show you a thing." And shockingly, the soldiers do not climb down the cliff. They remain at the top with the obvious advantage, both positionally and in numbers. And then they tell the two Israelites to climb up this cliff because they want to show them something. Well, it just so happens that Jonathan and his armor bearer also want to show the Philistines something as well. So the two men climb up this cliff toward the Philistine people. Outmaneuvered and outmanned, they climb. And I wonder what was going through the mind of Jonathan's helper at that point. With only the reassurance of his leader that told him to come up after me, for the Lord will give them into our hand. I get to nerd out with you for just a moment and show you some cool words in here. And so it is a joy for me, and I hope it is a bit of a joy for you. This is something cool that I stumbled across this week. So when we're looking at the two cliffs, the beginning of our story, the author goes into great detail of these cliffs, okay? He actually tells us the names of these cliffs. So one cliff, its name is, what did I say? Senah, okay? And that is the Hebrew word that means thorn. On the other side is the cliff called Bozez, which is the Hebrew word for shining. And the way the cliff is described on both sides is by using this Hebrew word called shane, which most translations will say rocky. But the word can also be translated into tooth. So commentator Peter Leithart, he suggests, I think very convincingly, that the language that's given here is very intentional death and resurrection language. And it is not obvious, but it is very subtle with some of the words that are used. In the Old Testament, there was this place that was described as the place of the dead. And so it was called Sheol. So maybe you've stumbled across it. There's a lot going on with that word that we're not going to get into, but one of the ways that it's described is like this devouring monster. So Psalm 141:7 is an example of this, and it says, "As when one plows and breaks up the earth, so shall our bones be scattered at the mouth of Sheol." So if we can just use our imaginations for a moment and picture these two cliffs as a mouth, that's kind of what the image that we're supposed to think of here. As Jonathan and his armor bearer descend into the valley of thorns, into the mouth of death, they come up on the other side with a new life that shines. And so when we return back to our story, we find that the armor bearer and Jonathan are climbing up this cliff. The author notes in verse 13 that the two men had to climb up on their hands and feet to get to the top. It is very intentional language that's being used here. It is talking about not this image of them like, going up a hill, like Apes Hill in Steinbach. This is a very much cliff-looking place that you had to climb up and hold on for dear life to get to the top. And as they held on for dear life, what was at the top? Their certain death. So they climbed. They ascended the teeth of that hill. There's no point in this story, you guys, that we should be thinking, like, wow, they really have a great idea. Like, Jonathan and his armor bearer are like, man, nobody would have thought of that. Like, it's going to make a lot of sense that they're going to win. No one is thinking this. Certainly not the Philistines that are at the edge of the cliff, looking down, thinking, like, what a bunch of silly people. Like, come on up, go for it. Anything besides Jonathan and his armor bearer getting completely destroyed would be unexpected and miraculous. And what comes next in our story is exactly that. As the two men reached the top of the hill, it says that the Philistines fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer killed after them. And that first strike, which Jonathan and his armor bearer made, killed about 20 men. Instantly, without hesitation, the author tells us that the Philistines fell at the hands of Jonathan and his helper. There isn't even a description that Jonathan and his armor bearer were harmed at all. There isn't any kind of language to suggest what this battle really looked like. All that happened was they got to the top of the hill and instantly 20 men died. It says that there was such a crazy thing to have happened that it actually caused a panic in the field. Yeah, no kidding. This garrison, this army, trembled. And then it just goes on and it just very, casually also mentions, by the way, the earth also quaked. It was as if all of creation didn't expect what it was seeing. It was as if God was intervening in this miraculous, impossible way that was causing everything about reality to tremble, because this is certainly impossible. And as a result, Saul and his army, who are hiding in caves, they hear this turmoil. And they rally together and they join Jonathan and the armor bearer in battle. And they go down into the valley, coming up on the other side, taking the same trip that Jonathan and his armor bearer takes. Following their example, they enter into this teeth-like valley, ascending the other side and attacking the people of Israel. They are following the leadership of Jonathan and this nobody, nameless armor bearer. But not before Saul has a brief moment of clarity as he seeks out the will of the Lord through the ark. And he says, and he's basically saying, what should we do? Should we go out into this battle, Lord? Tell us what we need to do. Which I think is a wise thing for a king to do in this moment. But this moment of clarity does not last very long. In verse 19, right after the ark is brought out, it says that, "Now while Saul was talking to the priest, the confusion in the camp of the Philistines increased more and more. So Saul said to the priest, 'Withdraw your hand.'" Never mind. We're just going to go into battle. There's too much going on right now that I know already what the right course of action is. Saul is beginning to see, he seeks God for direction, but when he's talking to the priest, he sees that, we don't actually have time for this, and he takes matters into his own hand again. Throughout the course of Saul's life, we see this theme continue with graver and graver consequences each time. Next week, we're going to see a very significant turning point where Saul does this, and it results in his biggest loss yet. But I want for us to see this comparison of these two characters this morning. For Saul, he has God's presence with him in the form of the ark. He has the priests with him. But just like the Israelites before him, Saul was using God like a good omen to get his own way. He was using God for his own will and not allowing God to use him for his. And for Jonathan, he chooses to act. But when we read about Jonathan, there is a stark difference between him and his father. For Jonathan, there is this continual language that gets brought up where he is considering and listening to the voice of God. And then there is this moment with the armor bearer who stands with his leader saying, I will be with you heart and soul. He is fully devoting and trusting where Jonathan leads. And it's this humorous thing that the armor bearer is actually showing more faith and devotion than King Saul is. As a result of Jonathan's obedience to the Lord, the people followed him and they trust him, and the armies are victorious against the Philistines. But it has nothing to do with their king, but his son and a nameless nobody armor bearer. This same son, I don't know if you've caught on or not, but he will not inherit the crown after him, after his father. Because of Saul's sin, Jonathan will not get to ever be the king of Israel. And I wonder what that was doing to Jonathan. It would make total sense that someone like Jonathan would feel absolutely betrayed and continually angry because he will never be able to hold the crown of Israel. And whoever the next person will hold that crown is, there would be a temptation, I imagine, for Jonathan to feel a lot of resentment toward them. But when we read about that next character, who is David, and Jonathan's relationship, it is anything but that. In chapter 18, verse 1, something we're going to get to in a few weeks, it describes the kind of relationship that Jonathan and David have. And it says that the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. The kind of commitment that these two men had was not unlike the armor bearer to Jonathan, who said, I will be with you heart and soul. The Bible is filled with these remarkable stories. These events that take us to places where we didn't thought possible and beyond our understanding and comprehension of what we thought was possible. They venture into the miraculous, leaving us in this state of awe and wonder. These stories should leave us feeling inspired, recognizing that all that is miraculous that happens within the pages of Scripture comes from God. It is God who is working in our lives of the people in this world, and He invites us to trust Him and to see what happens. It's in this story that we see God inviting Jonathan into the impossible, to have an obedience that is so radical that listening to it would certainly seem like a walk into the mouth of death. That trusting God is actually walking before us into that same mouth. Why do you think, as Jonathan and his armor bearer were going up the hill, why do you think that Jonathan told his armor bearer to come up after him? I think it's because Jonathan knew that God was saying the same thing to him. That I will go before you into this battle. And for you, follower of Jesus, who is following a God who has gone into battle before you? Recognize that this impossible battle that might be before you right now is most certainly not impossible. Our God is calling us to trust him and to walk in faithful obedience. Why? Because Jesus has gone before us into the mouth of Sheol, down into the thorns that were pierced on his head, and he has come up the other side. He is shining, and he is transformed. He has conquered the impossible evil of hell and the grave when the earth quaked and Satan trembled before him, when all of reality did not know what to do when God came up from the grave. And he has done this, and he invites us to do this with him. There's a small detail in verse 13. One of the places that the Israelites were hiding from the Philistines, it says a bunch of different things, in cisterns and caves, but one of the words that gets used is that they were hiding in tombs. They were literally hiding amongst the dead. And the call of Jonathan defeating the enemies beckons the Israelites out of their hiding. And that is the exact same call that we have as well. That we have been brought out of the tomb, and now we get to go into a battle that has already been won for us. Our battles we face may seem impossible at times, but we must recognize in this story who goes before us, who goes into the impossible before us. And as a church, I am recognizing that our calling for us in many ways is to be like this armor bearer who looks at everybody else in our church and says, you know what, the battles that you're facing, you do not have to go in it alone. Why? Because I am actually wanting to walk with you, heart and soul. I want to go with you into this impossible moment that you have been facing for a long, long time. And I want to walk with you in it. My challenge for you guys is that those battles that you're facing, that you feel like you have to do by yourself, I am challenging you to stop thinking like that. You are actually not by yourself here. That there is this invitation that is not just this like, come and whatever, feel like, yeah, whatever, I don't know, but like what I'm trying to say is that for us to be effective as a church, it means that the battles that we are facing, it's not that we're doing it on our own, but that we're inviting other people into it. Other people who have also committed in this church to be with each other, heart and soul. To walk into this feeling of death and to come up on the other side knowing that you are not alone and that God has gone before us and we can go before you. We can go with you. So stop doing these battles alone. Continually invite people into them, that we can walk with you, and that you can know what true community, what truly being a church means for us. Thank you, Jesus, that we do not walk these battles alone. You have made a home with us. You are transforming us heart and soul. And we ask, Lord, that we would invite everyone in. We would invite our church into the battles we face, that we can do this together. Amen.